So kicking things off with those 8 questions, I think that you should ask yourself these same questions. Maybe before you even get to Franco and I, ask yourself the following questions, and it might help figure out where you sit in this whole ownership transition discussion. And let's just take a few for an example. The first one is simple. Where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years? Do you see yourself working? Do you see yourself at the same company? Do you see yourself totally different space? You know, you exit the current construction company you're at, and now you're in a brand new industry to you because you just found it fun. Or perhaps you're one of those individuals where you sell your company on Friday, and by Monday you're down in the Bahamas sipping on a drink on the beach. Nonetheless, the answer to this question is really going to help you understand what your alternatives are. Some alternatives allow the sitting on the beach scenario. Some alternatives prohibit the sitting on the beach scenario. So answering this question really kicks off the whole idea of what alternatives are available to me and when do I need to start the process. As you're going to see later, selling your business takes time. There is time for prepping the business for sale. There's time to go through the process itself. And then there's usually integration time post-transaction. Even in the situation where you're on the beach, there is post-transaction integration time. And all those together build into your timeline of an exit. Are your timelines consistent with other shareholders, business partners? Do some folks want to stay around for some time and work post-transaction, or does everybody just want to leave? The answer to this question might, again, help you dive into the alternatives that you have, but might actually start picking out your buyers. Some buyers want your entire management team to stick around for some time. We'll talk a little bit about that private equity world. Other buyers may be more flexible. So answering your question about timelines will start to hone in on the buyer universe that you have in your transition alternatives. If you skip down a couple, look at number 5, tax consequences. So earlier I said we'll talk about the ESOP and some nuances that an ESOP has. ESOPs are very tax advantageous, both from a company perspective as well as an individual perspective. Matter of fact, they're one of the most tax advantageous structures in the ownership transition world. There's not many that can compete with it, and frankly, there's probably 0 that can compete with it on a pure estate planning situation. So when you're looking at your tax consequences, and particularly estate planning, what are you going to do with proceeds from a sale? Some of your ownership transaction alternatives might start to move around. You might start looking at different options given the ultimate objective of estate planning. Number 6 is really important. How can you prepare yourself and the company for exit? And really what are we trying to do is maximize value. Franco, I don't know how many times where we get into a situation where the business owner, you ask when what are your transition plans? And they said, well, I should have sold 2 years ago. And they're really not prepared for a sale, and it really impacts timeline.
Yeah, I mean, Great Recession is a great example where a lot of folks that were, kind of in your, I would say, normal retirement age, early 60s, kind of planning to exit around 65 thereabouts, were impacted significantly from a timeline aspect when the Great Recession came aboard. I mean, essentially, the demographic that we're dealing with is much more older. It used to be that we're talking with people in their late 50s, early 60s, but now it's very common that we're talking to someone in their 70s because it took a time for them to rebuild their business back to, pre, Great Recession levels and so forth. So yeah, it's a great point, Tom.
And I think a lot of businesses, particularly family-owned business, who we at Prairie deal a lot with, the financial books and records are often maybe not focused on. You're very, as a business owner, you're very integrated in the business and you know what's going on a day-to-day business perspective. However, the books and records from a buyer who may not know you from anybody else, when those books and records are not up to standard, you have a longer window of preparing the organization for sale. You need to get things in place, governance over internal controls, books and records, perhaps employment agreements. A lot of things need to be in place in order to make yourself most attractive to a buyer, whether it's an internal buyer or an external buyer, which we'll talk about. But nonetheless, there is time, as Franco pointed out, there is time that it takes to prepare yourself. And if you get caught in an economic cycle during your prep, it could really throw your timeline for a loop. And then finally, number 8 on this list, we have it down at the bottom because it doesn't really feel like an ownership transition ask about sellers. You know, what are your objectives as a seller? What do you want to be post-closing as a seller? The reality is that the answer to management succession in any ownership transition discussion is a key focus of the buyer. They're going to want to know, the second that I own this business, who is in charge? Even if ultimately the management team is going to transition out, they need to know who is there and what that transition plan looks like. Oftentimes we get ourselves into conversations where the business owner says, I'm one of those individuals that wants the Friday sale and the Sunday or the Monday afterwards, I'm down at the beach. And then our follow-up question is, well, when you go to the beach, who's going to run the business? And their answer may be, you know what, I've been working on that. I'm not sure. I probably need to go outside and find somebody. That all sounds fine, but as you know, the current hiring market is very challenged. Not only are you going to hire somebody, but now you have the trust of that individual is going to run the business as you did. It takes time to integrate people. So if you don't have a solid management succession plan in place, you are likely looking at an extended transition timeline.